Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Good morning, Lisa. Nice to see you here. My weekend is going great so far. How is your weekend going? I hope everybody joining today is having a fantastic weekend so far. So I'm just going to get right into it. So I've got my sketch here down on my Etchr Labs. This is the Perfect Sketchbook. This is one of my favorite sketchbooks for doing watercolor in. And I've got my outline of the leaf here. Now I just drew some really quick shapes for some water droplets. If you look at the reference photo, there is so much going on. So I really just tried to simplify a few of the shapes. And I would be here forever if I was trying to, copy all of the water droplets here. Now, I am trying out my new mic today, so if you could just put in the chat real quick if you can hear me okay and if everything sounds great and looks good, just to make sure that we're okay. And I think everything's going. Okay, so for the colors that I'm going to use, I think I'm going to use my sap green because I can see some warm areas in the leaf here. And then I'm going to be mixing my phthalo blue in there because there are some like darker blue areas. Okay, perfect. It sounds good and looks amazing. Thank you, Lisa. So those are the two colors that I'm mainly going to use for this. You can mix whatever colors you want in here. You could also use a little bit of a red to darken your green up. That's another nice mix that I like, but because these are a little bit more on the blue side, that's what I'm going to do. I've got a few brushes here. So I've got my size 8 silver black velvet and my size 2. My size 2 I'm mainly probably going to be using for some of these water droplets. Then I've got my Princeton Neptune round 6. And what I'm going to use this for is just to take a little bit of paint out of some of these water droplets because there are some light areas within here. So we want to be able to create some of that. And we will be doing a lot of this wet on wet too. So keep that in mind. Now I've got a glass, or not a glass palette, I've got a porcelain palette here, just because my other palette is quite dirty and I'm using it for another project right now. And then towards the very end, we do have some highlights on the water droplets here that I'll be using the P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White for. Now you could go ahead and mask those areas out beforehand, but I'm just going to use this. It's a really great product for that. So I'm going to grab my palette here and I'm just going to grab my sap green and my blue and get this on the palette and we will get going. So my sap green is slightly dirty because I said, like I've said, I've been using this. Now this is a fairly small painting, so I really don't need that much water to paint ratio. And because we are going to be doing this wet on wet, I can have a little bit more paint to water ratio, so this doesn't have to be so watered down. And then I'm going to get a little bit of the green over here and grab some of my phthalo blue. You can use whatever blue that you want. I just find the phthalo blue works really well to darken up the sap green and give us that nice deep blue green. So I'm just mixing those two colors, and this is how my palette gets super dirty because I just go in and mix them like that. And then these two colors will mix on our paper, of course, but it just gives us a little bit of variety within the painting. Okay, so I'm just going to leave my brush there since I've already got the color mixed up, and I'm going to grab my Princeton round 6 brush and I'm going to wet everything. I might just slightly come in with my kneaded eraser and just lighten some of this sketch, especially around the edges, because that will show through a little bit. But I did want to have my sketch dark enough so that you'd be able to see what's going on. Now I've gone ahead and sketched out some of these veins too, and I'm going to show you a really cool trick to get them in afterwards without having to draw them in or without having to really paint them in. We're going to scratch them in. So what we'll do for that is on the back of my Princeton brush here, it has a pretty, I don't know if you can see that, it's got a pointy end, And I just take that and go through the paint. And if your paint's still pretty wet, it will actually create some dark lines. And as your paint dries, you can use the same technique to actually scratch some white lines and it'll lift the paint. So that's kind of different. So I'll show you how to do that. But I'm just going to take my clean water here and just cover the whole surface area. I guess I could have picked a bigger brush to do this, but this is what I'm sticking with right now. And I'm going over the water droplets and everything. And I'm trying, you know, to go up to the edges as closely as I can. And just having a little bit of water on the surface is going to give us a little bit more time to get our paint down and have everything blend nice and smooth so we won't have any harsh edges. But I don't want any puddles of water on the surface either. So usually I do this and I give it a minute or two for the water to kind of sink in. And especially if you're using a good cotton paper, like 100% cotton paper, that first layer of water that you put on will soak in to the paper, and it just gives you a little bit more time to kind of play around with your colors. And depending on the sizing of your paper, it could take a little bit longer for that water to soak in, or it could soak in really fast and then you may have to keep re-wetting it. So just be mindful of that. And then sometimes I like to tilt my paper, and what it does is if it's wet, the whole area will be a little bit shiny, and if it's, you know, dry like this, I'll see those spots on the paper, and then I'll see if any water is running anywhere, and if it is, I can just go in and kind of sop that up a little bit. So I'm just going to go around my edges one more time, make sure everything is really nice and wet, and then we'll start throwing our colors in. And this tutorial today should be fairly quick, and I'm going to try to break it down as easily as possible so that anybody really can follow along with it. Okay, so I like that. So since I've got this dark color on my brush right now, we'll go in and start getting some of that in. And what I'm doing is I'm looking where the light is hitting the leaf, so we can see this edge is a little bit lighter in the middle here, kind of this edge, and everywhere the leaf kind of folds in, that's where this dark color is going. So I'm going to start maybe in a bigger area just to see how much this is going to spread, and it's going to spread quite a bit. So we'll get this kind of down here, and I may even want to add a little bit of water to this. This is pretty dark right now, so we're just getting this color in. And I'm not going around any of my water droplets or anything. I'm just looking at where I can see this more like blue-green color a little bit up here. And I'm going to bring this color down a little bit. And maybe over here a little bit. Okay, and before things start drying, I want to get in there and get some of my sap green in. And I'm just going to start dropping this in around that other color, and I'm going to try to keep my hand off the paper. And I'm just grabbing this and just letting these two colors kind of mingle. Now the wetter your paper is and the wetter your paints are, they're going to spread more. So keep that in mind. And I probably could have spent another minute or so really wetting this paper, but I kind of just wanted to get going. And once we get more of this color down, it's going to start shaping this leaf a little bit better. And we will go in and kind of fix up some of those darker blue areas too. And I'm going to bring this color right over some of these dark blue areas actually. Just so that it's a little more cohesive. And then I'm going to start mixing these two together again. Just getting that darker version. And I'm just dropping this in where I can see it. So now that everything's more of like an even wetness, we can kind of go in and start playing and seeing where we want this dark color to go. So I can see it almost coming up here. And the focus today is going to be on our water droplets, but I want a nice base to work with too, so. Okay, I'm going to bring this over here a little bit and bring it up just slightly. And you can see now that everything's kind of like the same wetness. It's not spreading or looking as weird as it did before. Okay, so I'm just going to drop a little bit of this in here. And I think really that's pretty much where I want these colors to go. I might just add a little bit more of this, more of the sap green just around some of these dark areas to kind of have like a middle color around some of them. But I want to make sure I'm keeping some of the light areas too. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'll grab my Princeton Neptune. I'm dipping it in my clean water, then I'm dabbing it off so it's pretty dry. And in some of these water droplets, I want to make sure I know where my light source is coming from. So in this picture, it's kind of coming this way. So I'm going to come along to some of the bottom of these water droplets and just pick up a little bit of paint while I have time to do that. And you can even dab on a face cloth. And I'm just picking up from the bottom half of some of these water droplets. And if you can't see yours, that's totally fine. Once it dries, it will like lighten down a little bit, so you'll be able to see some of your sketch lines again. And then you can just go in and scrub up a little bit of that. And we can also add some dark color back in. So if we make this top part of the water droplet a little bit darker, then this bottom part is going to look lighter anyway. So I think I had a little one here and a little one. I think I had one here. So this is the tricky part, trying to see it while it's still wet. I think I had one coming over here, but it's pretty dark at this point, so maybe it would be beneficial to show you how to scrub it up too. So I think I'll leave it like this so you can see this technique where you can just come in and just keep lifting. Now there is going to be a shadow outside of here, so if you go outside of your water droplet, that's totally fine. Don't worry about that because we will be putting back a shadow in. So I'm gonna just dry this real quick and let me know if this is too loud because I can mute it, but this is usually pretty soft. So we're just gonna go ahead and dry this completely. And then this is where the fun begins, because then we get to start working on some of the details. Oh, before I do that, I did want to show you guys how that you could scratch some of these lines in. I wonder if this is still wet enough. So I'm just using the back of my brush. You could use whatever you have that's really sharp, and you can kind of make these little indents in. And I think the paper is too dry at this point to do that. But when it's still a little bit wet, you can come in and form some of those lines. So we may end up just painting them on, but that's one way that I like to do it. But once your paper starts drying too much, then you've kind of lost that opportune moment. So I'm just going to give this a really good dry. If you guys have any questions or anything, then please let me know. And I think that's pretty good there. Okay, so maybe we'll get in some of these like little veins in the leaves real quick. And I'm just going to grab my sap green again and a little bit of my phthalo blue. And I need a little bit more water. And I'm using my size 2 silver black velvet brush right now for this, just because I can get a really nice fine point. And I want this to be fairly watered down so that I can get, you know, a good flow across the paper. And it doesn't have to be super dark because we've already got some color on there. Now, if you don't see your lines, you can always come back in and just, you know, sketch some back in here. But I'm probably just going to wing it. So there's always a center point, and then all of the lines come off the center point. So I'm going to get this kind of coming down here. So I'm going to follow that line that I had already put in. And this is important because when we're doing our water droplets, these lines are still going to show up through the water droplets. So we can have one coming from here. And I'm just bringing them all back to the center point. And then maybe we'll have another one coming through this water droplet there. And then we'll have some coming this way too. And this is fun, trying to practice your straight lines. And kind of be mindful when it's coming down some of the edges. So this is a little part that kind of curves on our leaf. So we want to create a slight curve going to the edge there too. So again, a little curve coming over here. And we'll just do another little one there. Then we can grab a little bit of the darker color, and through the darker areas, that's where I will drop this in. Just ever so slightly, so it sort of looks like as we get into the darker areas, the line will darken up, like the vein will be a little bit darker. And sometimes it's just a subtle transition. Okay, so once we've got that down, I will rinse, and let's go ahead and we'll let that dry for a second, and I want to talk about the anatomy of a watercolor droplet. So I'm going to move this over to the side real quick, and there's just a couple of things that we need to know. So first, we need to know the size. So the larger the watercolor droplet, we want to make it look rounder. And the smaller it is, then the less shadow we're going to have at the bottom. But we also want to know where our light source is coming from. So let's just say the light source is coming this way. Then our little highlight is going to be at the top. And then the light part on this water droplet is going to be exactly across from it. And then this will be all in shadow. And as it comes down, it's going to get a little bit lighter. So we're transitioning into our light area, and then we're going to have a reverse shadow down here. And depending how strong the light source is, you might have like a little cast highlight there as well. So for instance, if we had one that was a little shaped like this, but let's say our light source was coming this way, again, we'll have our little highlight here, we'll have a bigger highlight here. This is going to be all dark, and then our shadow is going to be coming over this way. So that's sort of what's going on here. The light source is coming a little bit across. So this is sort of what we're going to be working with today. The Kraken's Mark says, "Hi Naomi, hope you've been doing well." Thank you so much. I have been doing well. I hope you have as well. All right, so we'll start working on some of our things here, and this is pretty much dry, so I'm just going to draw a couple of these back in here just so we can see them. And I really liked this reference because these weren't all just like flat, like perfectly round little water droplets. Some of them are, but some of them are a little bit oddly shaped, which is kind of nice. I think we'll have one coming here. There was another oddly shaped one here. We'll put one in over here. So I'm just picking a few places. And then we'll have this one here. Okay, so you can see I didn't pick all of the ones that were in the reference photo. That's just too much and it's going to get a little distracting. So we've got the ones here. Now, if we weren't able to get all of the light areas out, you can just take a scrubber brush or whatever brush that you like to use that lifts watercolor well. And so again, we want to keep in mind where the light source is coming from this way. You want to just come in and lighten this bottom part of the water droplet. So I just come in and just ever so slightly lighten that. And with these scrubber brushes, you do want to be kind of mindful because they can lift color very easily, but depending what papers you're using, they can also rip your paper. So you might want to just use a stiffer brush. Now I'm taking color about halfway off some of these, and we are going to go back and add a little bit more. And so if you have kind of a harsh line here, don't worry about that too much. But I don't want to get rid of the color completely either from here. I mean, if we go down to the white of the paper, that's fine. You can always add a little bit more in. We just want it a little bit lighter than what's already there. And sometimes these scrubber brushes can get a little bit noisy, so I do apologize for that. But this is all prep work for making our little water droplets look realistic. So we're just coming in, getting rid of a little bit of this color. Now, where I've got this vein coming in here too, I'm lifting that up as well, because we're still going to have a hint of it, but in the light area it's obviously going to be a little bit lighter than some of the other veins. And I'll scrub this one a little bit too. So again, scrubbing that vein off and everything, and about halfway up. Okay, so I think I've got all of them where I want it. And again, be very careful, you know, not to, if you feel like your paper's ripping at all, that's totally fine. Go darker than trying to get rid of some of this. Okay. So I am just going to dry this just for one quick second, just to make sure that the areas that we just scrubbed off are going to be nice and dry. And then I'm going to come in with my size 2 brush, and I'm going to use this size 6 Princeton brush just to soften some of the edges. Now, we want to be mindful too of the color placement. So in the areas where our water droplet is in the lighter color placement, we're going to pick from our lighter color mix, and where it's in our darker color placement here, we're going to pick from our darker mix, just to make it again look a little bit more realistic, because if we're just using the same color all throughout, it's going to start looking a little flat and a little fake. So we'll start over here, and again I'm just going to get this in the top part, and I'm bringing it down about halfway-ish, maybe 3/4 of the way. Then I will rinse this brush off, dab it off, and then I'm just going to soften this edge out and just slightly coax that paint down. But I want to be mindful to keep that light area, and you can always go in and just add a little bit more up at the top. So while I have this light color, we'll work on some of these lighter ones. And I'm just following the shape of the water droplet, so this is why you can really do any shape that you want. So it's fun not to always do those perfectly round water droplets. Maybe I'll go in and do a few of the darker ones too while we're at it. So I'm just working on the inside of the water droplet right now. And if I'm not getting good flow, then I just add a little bit of water to it. And I'm using the same colors because the water droplet's going to reflect the same colors underneath of it. So that's why I'm not using any other colors to darken it. I'm just using a more dark concentrated version of that color, if that makes sense. And then I'm just coming and softening that edge. And the bigger area that you leave white, it will give the impression that the water droplet is bigger and more round as well. So I want this one to be nice and big. And we'll grab a little bit more of this. I'm just looking for the ones that are in the darkest areas. And if I've got too much water on that and it spreads, then I just dab it off and just come back. And I'm just going back and forth between the two color mixes that I've made, just depending where the water droplet is. And this one is pretty light over here, so I'm even going to pick maybe from a little bit more lighter area and just water it down slightly. Again, just coming and softening. But you can see how we can still see the vein through here and just a slight bit of the vein through the highlight. So you want to make sure you have that variation in there too. And this is definitely the part that takes the longest, but all this attention to this detail will really pay off once we're done. And I'm almost like outlining the water droplet and then just filling it in. And then rinsing and dabbing this brush off and using that damp brush. And these Princeton Neptune brushes are so great for this. Now I think I want to add just a little bit more green in here. Okay. This one's pretty small, so I'm just going to put a tiny bit in. And then soften that. I'm just trying to scrub a little bit more out here. That just kind of got a little carried away and spread a little bit more than I wanted. Okay, so now we're gonna start working on the outside shadows. So if we look here, we've got the very highlight, then our dark area, and that very highlight we will put at the end. Then we've got our highlight down here, and then we've got a dark area outside of it. And depending how big the dark area out there is going to show how tall or how round our water droplets are. And again, I'm using the same color mixes depending on where it is in here. I've tried the Princeton Neptune brushes. They're lovely. They're really great. I love my silver black velvets, but these are definitely my second choice, hands down. So I'm coming around where the highlight is, and that's where I'm putting this in. And then depending how big or how round, I'm going to pull this out a little bit. Then we'll come in with that Princeton Neptune brush, or whatever brush you're using to soften, and we're just going to come around the outside edge and just soften that. And that immediately gives it a more 3D look. And again, we want to be mindful of the shape of the water droplet. So I don't want to just do, you know, one here. I want to do go along the shape of it. So here again, I'm just following, and that's why I said if you scrub outside a little bit, that's totally fine. And then I'm finding where the tallest part is, and that's where I'm pulling that color down. And if you need to go back in and just dab a little bit more in, you can. Okay, I'm going to grab a little bit from our lighter mix here. Get some of these lighter ones in. So again, our light source is coming this way, so I want to be mindful of that too. This is a little bit smaller, so I'm not going to pull it out quite as much. So I'm really softening that edge there. And I hope this is starting, you know, compared to these ones, I hope these ones are starting to pop on the paper for you. Oops. And again, I'm following, so the largest part is here, so I'm going to have this color come down more towards this area, because again our highlight's coming this way, but I need it to pull down. And then just rinse, dab, and soften. And then I'm constantly rinsing this brush out and dabbing it off, just because I don't want it to get like full of that green color, because then it's not going to soften or really do much of anything. It's just going to be adding more green on. Okay. I'm getting a little bit more of that sort of mid-tone, so in between the two colors. And the paint that you're using has to be wet enough so it's not going to start drying immediately on the paper too. So you want to give yourself enough time to kind of get the paint down and then have time to kind of come in and soften those edges. Because if it starts drying too quick, then you're going to get a harsh edge too. So it's sort of like a fine thing between, you know, too wet that it's just going to go everywhere and not wet enough that you're not going to get the effect that you want. Now this is a much smaller one, so I'm really keeping that highlight right at that edge, or I mean that shadow, I should say, right at that edge. And just softening it a little bit. So I'm just barely touching the tip of the bristles to that sometimes. Getting a little bit darker. Again, this one's a little bit smaller. It's also a little bit more rounded. And if any of them aren't dark enough, you can always go back in and darken them up. That's not a problem at all. Like this one, we could maybe darken up again and it should be dry by now. So if you find that it's not giving you that pop, that contrast that you're going for, just go in and do it again. No big deal. There. So as long as all of your shapes are going in the same direction that your light source is coming in, then you can really have fun and play with some of these shapes. Now this bottom one down here is going to be sort of the same thing. So I'm getting our dark color up at the top. And I realized I didn't do the inside of it because we're not going to have a shadow underneath of it here because there's nothing underneath. Now if you had a background, this would reflect the background in the highlight, but because there's nothing, we're just going to soften this out. And I'm just dipping, dabbing, and softening. And then I'm just going to dab the outside here just to make sure it's dry real quick. And we would just see like a slight dark edge around the outside here. Not a whole lot where that leaf is coming, and then you can see just the tip of the leaf down at the bottom, but I'm even going to come in and just dab that so it's very subtle. And I could even come back in and just remove a little bit more of the pigment here. So again, with my damp brush, just softening this edge here. There. So I think I like that. I need to remember to soften edges. I don't usually do that. Yeah, it makes a big difference because you can see, you know, hard edge versus soft edge. It really makes a big difference when with certain paintings. Now there are hard edges and soft edges together in most paintings. Now I'm just noticing this one down here. I definitely could go back in and make that a little bit darker. So let's just do that. And this is one of those times where this is almost such a dark area. I might not go ahead and really soften it, just because I do want it to stand out against. Like you can see, it's almost blending right into that dark color there. So that would be a time when maybe I would use my, artistic liberties and say, okay, I'm going to leave that a little bit more harsh there because I do want it to pop. All right. So now the last step that we have to do to make these really pop is we have to have our brightest little highlight up here. So again, if we're looking at this, we've got, the inside, which is dark. We've got our lighter area at the bottom. We've got our shadow at the bottom, but we have this little tiny highlight of where the light is shining through. So we want to make sure we get that in. I'm just going to flip this around a little bit here. And I'm going to use the P.H. Martin Bleed Proof White for this, but I'm just going to dry these super quick to make sure that these are very dry. Otherwise, it's just going to mix in with the green color. Now, like I was saying at the beginning of the video, you could use some masking fluid to go ahead and mask out these little areas, but for something small like this, I don't mind using a little bit of this white color. I think this is an ink, but you could use gouache, you could use white watercolor. I'm just going to grab my size 2 brush here and just get a little bit onto my palette. And then I'll go ahead and just put the top back on so this doesn't end up drying out. Now I'm going to get most of this off my brush. And depending how strong the highlight is, or how strong the light source is, the highlight will be much brighter. And sometimes you even have a little cast highlight down here. Now I don't see that in this reference photo, but sometimes you do see them. But again, we want to have this highlight coming directly across from where our other highlight would be. So I need a little bit more because that's not even showing up. So I'm just going to have this kind of coming in across here. And it's not quite touching the outside of the water droplet, but it's kind of mimicking this, but the opposite. So if it's curving this way, it's going to curve the opposite way up here. And it's usually a very small highlight. Sometimes it's broken up into like a little bit bigger piece and then a smaller piece. So here it's pretty small. And sometimes you'll have like a piece and then like more of like a little line coming, just depending. Sometimes it's just a little dot. If it's a very small area like this, it might just be a little dot. Now some of these have a couple little places because it's a bigger area. And I like to do sort of like a curvy line and then maybe a dot here or there, just depending. And then again, even at this one, we're going to have a little bit more of like a curved one. So there. Crazy how tiny white dots suddenly transform, how much more realistic the droplets look. Exactly. It's just putting those little details in there and paying attention to some of those details. And honestly, you know, colors really don't matter that much. We could have used any colors for this leaf, but it's more of the placement of everything. So once you decide where your light source is coming from, it's just making sure that everything lines up that way. So I hope that makes sense. And I hope you guys enjoyed this quick and easy tutorial. If you guys have any last questions for me, let me know. I might show you guys what I've been working on real quick. So this is probably going to go up this week on my Patreon. And I've been trying to push myself to do landscapes and skies and stuff. So I really like how this came out. I really want it to play with some bright, colorful colors. Usually when I do a silhouette painting like this, I'll do a galaxy background, but I thought I wanted to just play around with some colors and see what I could create. So I really like how that turned out. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you guys enjoy this, and I hope you learned something. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll try to plan another live stream in a couple of weeks or so. So if you have any ideas, or if you have anything that you want to see us do, then, you know, leave that in the comments down below. But thank you guys so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the like notification, because that really does help me out too. All right, bye guys.